We're getting started with episode 51 of the Buffalo Community Podcast. We're super excited to be rolling all the way through February.
This is the Buffalo Community Podcast, all about the greatest small town in the USA, the people in it, and how it all works together. DJ. Here are your hosts, Tyler Reese and Mark Benzer.
I gotta fade that out. More like a radio DJ.
Yeah.
Episode 51,
yep.
Buffalo Rock Winery. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for working around all these schedules. We appreciate it. You know, we thank all of our business owners that are coming in, and oftentimes it's post hours.
Yeah, that's how we roll, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, Nicole Dietman, Buffalo Rock Winery. Why don't you kind of give us a little bit of maybe, let's go back 10, 15 years and kind of what inspired it. Where are you from, and bring us current.
All right. So go 15 years. My husband actually proposed in California. We had spent a day in Napa and a day in Sonoma, and he proposed on our way back to San Francisco. I have loved wine since I discovered I was allergic to beer. So that's just been a few more than 15 years.
Sure.
So 14 years ago, we moved here, actually 14 years this month, and immediately I bought vines and planted that spring. So the oldest of my vines will be 14 years old in May, and then I decided that it wasn't enough. I planted 320 vines and had a child on at that time, and then another one 18 months later, and decided I needed to plant another 200. So I have over 500 vines. It's almost an acre. And then I planted some more around the courtyard of the winery for aesthetics. So started 14 years ago, and then I opened the winery over 10 years ago. So celebrated my 10th anniversary in October. And, I'm still learning the game. Everything changes from year to year.
Right. When you initially started planting, was it always with the envision of producing, like mass producing, I guess?
I knew I'd go larger than hobby, because anything over 20 is no longer a hobby. I was informed when I picked up my 320.
Oh.
and
Was that the cashier or from your husband?
No, that was from the nursery owner that I bought him from, and I was also pregnant. So he was just like, you got your hands full. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, right.
But when we lived in the metro, my husband thought he had to talk me into moving out here, or moving out where we could get more land and not be a mile from the airport. Mm-hmm. And he said, what do you think of the idea of us getting some land and you can put a vineyard in?
Wow.
I was like, okay.
Sure.
So the vineyard idea was there, before we started looking for land out this way. And the winery was really just a dream that I didn't think I could conceptualize. But I had my first child, and I was still commuting to Roseville from out here. And I was 1.5 weeks into going back from maternity leave and got the call from daycare for the first time. Oh, your son has a fever. You have to come get him. I'm like, okay, I'll be there in an hour. Mm-hmm. And I thought then and there I could not continue to be an hour away. And so I decided to do something I could be at home and raise my kids.
Sure. So you said something, you always knew you were going to be more than just a hobby. How does that even start? I mean, is it just, let's just make wine, or most people just buy it? What was that first step of let's stomp on some grapes?
Go ahead and keep buying. I'll supply it for you now.
Yeah, right.
So yes, I was making wine as a hobby before moving out here. So I've been making wine for over 15 years. It's just like an out of control hobby or obsession, I guess. I started with a gallon and thought, this is fun. It turned out. Yeah. And that was the first mistake, is that it turned out.
Yeah, right.
And then a gallon became 2, 3, 5, and then we moved out here, and I totally took over the basement. I had 6 and 10 gallon carboys going, and then I was pregnant. And, nursing for all those years and not being able to drink it, and it just kept piling up. And my husband was like, crap, or get off the pot. You got to do something here. So when he basically said that, I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to turn the pole barn that's just post and steel and make it my winery.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, and it's nice that you have, you didn't have to twist your husband's arm into chasing this dream and making it a reality, which is really nice to have that encouragement rather than having to try to convince or
definitely. And he doesn't even really like wine. So
yeah.
Well, he's not allergic to beer, right?
Yeah.
He's not allergic to beer, but he's definitely not allergic to Captain either.
Right.
So you start making it. What take me through that process of like, do you just Google how do I make wine? Do you pick up grapes? I mean, your first batch.
My first batch, I had a coworker at the time when I worked for the city of Roseville, and his wife and him had a small hobby vineyard in their backyard, and they had a bunch of grapes that they couldn't use that year. And
Under 20 plants, though.
I would say under 20. Yeah. It's still a lot of work.
Yeah, right.
But he just said, hey, I know you like wine. Do you want to give it a shot and make some? So his wife walked me through it, and I just bought the small 1 gallon kit, and so you have this little jug of a carboy and a little bucket, and buy the little additives and sulfate and the yeast and everything, all the little stuff you need. And it's if somebody cans, they kind of know the process of how you break down the fruit and make the juice out of it. And
sure,
you can add water with grape wine. You generally don't add water. It's just the juice, so it's 100% pure grape juice. Some other fruit wines you can, but you pick them, you harvest, you crush and destem the fruit and press it. And if it's a red wine, it's going to go into the vat immediately and start fermentation on the skin. So it's called primary fermentation. And then after a little while, you'll press that, and then it goes into secondary fermentation. And it's like 3 to 5% alcohol at that point. And then you let it ferment, and you rack it or siphon it over to get the sediment off, and you keep doing that for a few times until it's clarified and get to a point where you can bottle it.
So that process, start to finish, is
a year.
A year.
Okay. Unless you're going to age it, then it could be 2 years. Age it in oak, then it would be like 2 years. You could do some sweet, non-oaked. Maybe a fruitier wine in 6 months.
Okay.
But to actually settle it and try to make it as clear as possible. But not that there's anything wrong with sediment. It's totally natural. It's just people don't like the look of it.
Right.
So if you're wanting some homemade wine, or some locally made wine, I should say, not homemade, you don't have time to do it for this next weekend. Go to Buffalo Rock.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You don't have time to do that.
You can do beer in 5 weeks or something, but wine, you can't do it that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, so everything that you're selling now was done a year ago, and everything you're doing today is, is there, do you have it kind of narrowed down to where you have your core products and?
Sure, yes, I try. So my most popular is a sweet red wine called Oxymoron. So
Love
it's kind of, have you had it?
Well, I love the name.
Oh,
I haven't had it yet, so.
Okay, just checking, because some people have,
Yeah.
even though you haven't been out. And it's more for that white wine drinker who would like to drink the reds, that, for the health benefits of the resveratrol and whatnot. But there is some of that in the white too. So you don't have to drink red. You can drink your white.
Yeah.
But people just want to try to drink red. So it's kind of that gateway red.
Sure.
You don't have to go in. You don't have to do the dry cab or Zinfandel or whatever. But yet you don't have to do the white Zinfandel that people mock, but drink whatever you like.
Right.
It's
I love that. I think some people get, especially in the wine community, I'll call it. Yeah. There's that. That's not good wine. It's like, well, what if you like it?
Yeah.
Then it's like really good wine, right? Yeah. But there's a certain amount of people that kind of give other people and like yourself kind of a bad rep, I would think, for
they come in all kinds.
Being a snob, right?
The wines come in all kinds, and so do the people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but drink what you like. And people ask me, is it okay if I put ice in it? If you want to drink it that way, drink it that way. I mean, who am I to say?
Yeah.
As you hear the blender going, you're like, oh, gosh.
I have one of my most...
Smoothies, or not smoothies, but yeah.
Frappe. I have one of my most popular items is a
really?
frozen... Yeah,
I was
frappe.
kidding.
No. It's,
very cool.
Yeah.
What is the biggest difference? Like, is climate a challenge when it comes to like growing your own grapes? And
yes. So
what's that like?
This year has been okay, knock on wood, so far. But you get a polar vortex like a few years ago, and all my vines died down to the ground. Now they survive; they're going to come up from the ground, but I have to start over. And basically, you have to have 3 consecutive good years to get a really full harvest.
Ooh.
So yes, and that has happened twice in the 14 years that I've had vines.
So does that just mean low production during those years, or
nothing for 2 years if it starts over from the ground? Like nothing for 2 years, but by the 3rd year, the roots are established well, so they're going to come up faster and be more hardy and more. They're going to produce more fruit, but a couple years you're done, because grapes only grow on last year's growth. So if you have nothing ground up, then you got to let it grow that 1 year. You might get a few the next year, but really it's going to be 3.
Sure.
So does that mean that you just can't sell wine for 2 years?
Oh, thankfully I don't depend on only my grapes. Yeah, no,
Okay,
I have
gotcha.
local farmers. And
sure.
even if one has a bad year, and I have several that I work with, and they balance it.
Got your back.
Yeah, and if need be, then I can certainly source from out of state, but that is not my priority or preference.
Yeah, most of your stuff, or nearly all of it's local, correct?
Yeah, some years 100% is. It depends on what the farmers can produce and what they've got that I work with. If they're low on something, then I might have to supplement.
Sure.
And go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say you started asking me about how I get to the point where I just have a balance. I think you were asking.
Yeah.
Yes, that I've kind of figured out. I know what sells. Sweet wine sells.
Yeah.
Like Minnesotans love sweet wine overall. I like dry. So here I have to make stuff that I don't necessarily drink because it's too sweet for me, but I do make dry. I make a little bit of everything. But yes, I make enough that it carries over. So if I start bottling in, say, 4 to 6 months last fall's harvest, then I will I won't have run out, hopefully. Sometimes I run out, though. I mean, supply and demand is hard to predict.
Yeah.
On 520 plants, that's how many you have, right?
A little more than that,
Give
but
or
yeah.
take,
Yep.
How many bottles is that on a normal year, not a polar vortex year?
I've never had a full harvest almond grapes year yet, but you can say maybe 10, that'd be light, but 10 pounds per vine. Let's say 15. That's a little heavy, though. It takes about 15 pounds for a gallon.
Okay.
So if I have to say 500 vines, I can have 500 gallons of wine. And that's if I actually did that myself, then I might just do that for the year, but I don't ever get that from mine. And
that's like perfect scenario.
Yes.
Full capacity.
Right. And I've produced as much as 2,000 gallons in a year, but the last couple of years, especially 2020, not knowing, I only bought from my local growers and didn't go any further and didn't source anything else, and even didn't buy some of the fruit that I don't always buy. I bought my growers that I've worked with for 7 to 10 years. I bought everything that they had that I could, and just left it at that. So it was a little lighter this year.
Sure.
And are these, you think of, I think most people think of grapes and they think of, red or green seedless grapes, right? What is the biggest difference between like a store-bought grape and what you're using?
Huge difference. Well, one, they're seeds, so they're not really fun to just nibble on. They're much smaller, so the their skin to meat ratio is much smaller. But the biggest thing is that they're seeds. Like there's soft seeds in some of the edible, seedless grapes that still have seeds, but these seeds you're not eating.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than eating a grape with a seed in it.
Yeah, and
Like
and
side skew right there is like, oh, sweet seedless.
I remember when I was a kid.
Disappointed
Yeah,
as a kid.
when I was a kid, you used to accidentally buy grapes with seeds in them. I can't tell you the last time I accidentally or even saw. It's like they don't even exist anymore.
it's not
Except at Buffalo Rock.
Yeah, the market's not there for
Yeah.
edible seed full.
Yeah.
I was
right.
promptly reminded by my 6-year-old this weekend. There's seeds in these.
You got
Eat around
seeded
them.
grapes?
So you bought some with seeds?
Well, I think there's one with seeds.
Oh.
In it,
Oh.
so
This,
That's all-
mutation or whatever.
Yeah,
So they
exactly.
might as well all have seeds.
yeah, he didn't eat anymore.
Yeah.
And then the other big thing, big difference is that the grapes I use are developed mostly from the University of Minnesota to be wine grapes.
Sure.
So they're going to have the characteristics that you would want, some tannin, some, the mouthfeel that you can get from the juice, once you develop it into the wine. But they're made for the wine so that, acid levels and harvest parameters can match up to what you'd want to work with.
What is it about like the classic well-known wine countries of the world? What is it about like their climate or that makes Napa or, France, right? Or, some of the other New Zealand, some of the big producers.
Well, much more mild. They aren't having to deal with grapes that have to be able to survive minus 25 degrees. And if there's no snow, that's really hard on the vines. If there's snow for a blanket, that's beneficial. They have a lot longer growing season. I mean, we have to worry about late frost in the spring and early frost in the fall. So a lot of times you can't get that acid level down. So that's one thing for people that aren't familiar with Minnesota wines. They're going to get that initial acidic up front, and but that I'll get back to that. But the acid is just purely from the harvest parameters, and there's only so much you can do about it. Now, the benefit of that is that Minnesota wines are very food friendly. You don't have to work too hard to pair things up. The acidity goes with like anything fatty, any cheesy, creamy, anything.
Something super Minnesota-y.
Yeah.
Cheesy,
Hot
dish.
creamy.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm just like, how do you sleep at night? Like, well, if it gets too cold, I lose all my vines, all of them. If I don't get an early coat, like, I just feel like there's just so much that you're just is teetering on the brink of, I don't want to say disaster, but just like pain in the.
Yeah, I don't sleep much.
Yeah, right.
not necessarily because of that, because my mind never shuts off. But that is why I have crazy names for my wines, like the oxymoron. And literally all my wines are just like, they're either named after my family members or something happened. Like I have one called Mayhem. And the first time I made that wine, it literally fermented and plugged the airlock. And I was working full time still in Roosevelt, and got home and I could hear a piercing noise shooting. It was crazy, and it had actually pushed so much pressure on the top of the drum cover that it bowed. And when I released it, it shot up and hit my 14-foot ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, mayhem. It happens.
Yep.
See, and
So is that shot then? Is that?
Oh no,
No.
just it's mostly froth and
Sure.
foam. It's not nearly as much waste. It's just a huge mess, and
Yeah.
whatever shoots out, it just is gone, and the rest
Right.
stays in the tank.
does your family members know who is named after what, like oxymoron? Whoever that's named after, do they know?
Well, oxymoron is because there wasn't sweet red wines at the time, and I made my first batch of wine. It was red, and I knew that if I made it, I was going to drink it all. Or if I made it dry the way I wanted to, nobody was going to drink it except me. So I made it sweet, and that was my first oxymoron. And it literally was like an oxymoron in a bottle.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now there's more sweet reds out there, but
Sure.
15, 16 years ago, there really wasn't. So that one's not named after anyone, but the real names that I have, they have their name in them. Like
Oh,
my
okay.
mom is Rosemary, and it's Rosemary's Rosé, and Papa
Okay.
Mike's Rockin' Rosé, my dad, and my father-in-law's Papa Steve's Contraband, or Peg's Apple is my mother-in-law. My kids both have wines. My husband has Jeff Shining Moon, which is a port. Yeah,
That's
so they're
fun.
like straightforward.
Yep.
I'm not insulting anyone.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. And, like,
secretively.
Yeah.
Well, all 25,000 of our listeners are like, and they're like, wait a second.
Well, there's like Blonde Bomber and Hot Mama.
Yeah.
Those are other ones, not a pat on my back, just kind of an inside joke.
I hope to be a part of one of those someday.
Well, my son's Marcus, so that's
Yeah.
what's closest.
There you go.
How many varieties do you typically carry that you produce each year?
A lot, over 20.
That,
So
Wow.
literally something for everyone.
yeah.
And that I'm kind of on the lighter. I was up to 30 when I had a lot of time to bottle in last spring because of everything. I had 30 different kinds. Yeah.
So what, like, and maybe this is hard to answer in a 30-minute podcast or whatever, but like, I'm just trying to think like, okay, so how, you have this red wine and you have this red wine and you want to make something that's not this red wine, something different than the two red wines that you already have. Like, just, I suppose it's not that much different than, I mean, it's way different than beer, but just like you can make any different kind of beer.
Yep, a lot of factors. And the biggest thing is going to be the harvest parameters because you can't do much with the sugar level and the acid that you get, except that you can add sugar. You can't really take away the acid. You can't take away the sugar, but you can ferment it dry. So yes, you can create anything from. Well, you can't always ferment it dry, so that's another thing. But you could always back sweeten it, like an oxymoron is always sweetened.
Okay.
So you could take. I could take a tank of. I could take a harvest of one grape, and I can make 4 different batches, and they could all taste different.
Okay.
But just using different yeast, different sugar levels, just different process, and then of course if I blended. But literally, I could take 4 different tanks of the same exact grape, 100% of that varietal. Sure. And it could turn out different. It would turn out differently if I wanted to make them look or taste differently.
Mm-hmm. I think you asked Pugs the question, but I'd be curious to know too. Anything that just didn't, like, I can't bottle this and sell this. This just didn't work out.
Oh, not necessarily that, but sometimes there's re-fermentation. So if it wasn't completely stable, especially if it's a sweet wine. So I've had like corks that pop, and it's a very unfortunate situation.
Always a great wake-up call when you hear that pop, right?
Yes, it's very loud.
Yeah.
And very messy. Yeah. So there's been some flash sales. I got to drink it right away and keep it in the fridge.
Right, yeah.
It happens to the best of us.
Do you, with the regulations in making wine, I'm sure there's plenty of red tape that you've got to go through.
Yes.
Now, are you maxed out on how much you can produce?
Yes, but it's...
You're not even close to
that.
Oh
my gosh, no. Okay. Nobody in Minnesota is there.
And then secondly, is there a threshold of alcohol content that you have to stay under? Is there a gauge that makes a wine drinkable?
Table wine is anywhere from in Minnesota it's 7 to 14%.
Sure.
Federally it's 7 to 16%. That changed a few years ago. And so then a port in Minnesota would be the 14 to 21%.
Yeah.
And that could be fermented above 14, and it can be fortified. So take another grape spirit, brandy or whatnot, and bumping up the alcohol. So up to 21%. And then I've never done it, but I have the reports. They're on the same report, so I could do 21 to, I'm not even sure what the next step is. That'd be a lot of fortification. You could not ferment it that warm, that hot as far as alcohol goes. And then, of course, under 7% would be more like the ciders. And I can do that, but then the labels are regulated differently.
Yeah.
So that goes through the FDA versus TTB. So tobacco and trade.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, there's regulations everywhere.
Yeah. I get that a lot. In the insurance business, it's you talk to, man, you just take all the fun out of this business. I'm trying to run here, and I would imagine there's
not like the free spirit of the real estate world.
Yeah.
Right. There's no laws in that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. What's next for Buffalo Rock Winery?
I'm looking forward to spring and opening up outside again because indoor regulations are too stiff right now. I'm still doing some very limited hours, but at 50% capacity in a very small room already, It's best to be outside. So hopefully we have an early spring in April.
Yeah.
Yeah. Early spring, long summer.
Yeah.
And last year was actually pretty great because most of the time I had to serve outside, and it for the most part worked out. Not a lot of rainy weekends.
Yeah.
Bought a lot of
I feel
umbrellas.
weather-wise, we were pretty blessed last year for how much everything else sucked,
Yes.
to put it bluntly. But
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have. Do you try to kind of follow the occasional sales schedule with your hours?
Yep. In the winter, I for the last maybe 7 years, I've done the 1 weekend a month, maybe a special event here or there, and then generally in the summer months I'll add hours.
And
regular.
I know like Buffalo's kind of become known as a little bit of a destination for occasional sales and things like that. Do you find you get a lot of people coming out to Buffalo to hit Buffalo Rock Winery while they're in town, or where are you seeing a lot of your clients come from?
Absolutely. Definitely a tourist destination. Every winery in Minnesota has that draw. But this last year with 2020 and all the craziness that it brought, I have never seen so many local Buffalonians and
Awesome.
In the whole area within 10 miles that had never been out before. So it was pretty incredible for that local support for a small business.
that's awesome. And that's one reason that we're super excited to have you on the Buffalo Community Podcast. And I think stories like that is what makes Buffalo the greatest small town in the USA. And one, thank you for coming out here. Go buy some wine, go visit, pray for an early spring. For the Buffalo Community Podcast, I'm Tyler Reese.
I'm Mark Benzer.
And I'm Nicole Dietman.
Thank you.